Welcome. I thought I should quickly come online because I know this is the graduate interview season. We were able to collect some outstanding resources that would really help you during your grad school interview. It's 12 a.m. here, and I just want to quickly do this because I just finished interacting with someone who found this very, very helpful. So I thought, I should share it with other members of this platform before our next meeting because some of you would have had your interviews before we meet uh, later this month, actually. So let me share my screen so that you can access this. Let's see. All right. I know I'm seeing myself here. So my hope is that you can see my screen. So what you should do is to go, whenever you are ready to prepare, go to bestmanacademy.com, bestmanacademy.com, go to the blog section, and it's one of our recent blog posts. Like the title states here, grad school interviews questions, 5 resources from US professors. So what we did here was to um, collate some of the suggestions that various professors have gave in terms of expectations and the questions and how to carry yourself during this interview process. So I'm not going to read, of course, I'm not going to read the whole blog post. The intent of this video, my intent in making this video coming live is to show you where this resource is and to actually point out some key things that I think you should take note of. And so these are some of the things we've talked about during some of our sessions. So, but one of the things you should note from Dr. Heyman from Harvard, you would likely be asked, about your research experience. No matter how little you've done, you should have that poise in, explaining what you've done in the past. And in order to catch their attention and to show that you're a good candidate, the most important thing is to have structure when you are actually presenting your research experience. And that is what Dr. Heyman talked about here. You need to have a good structure. And he went ahead to talk about, the suggestion when it comes to how you should structure your response to questions about research. I'm not going to go through it. It's pretty much self-explanatory. But one thing that I think we've talked about before is, your ability to form a research question. So you need to be able to start potentially by giving them the big picture of your research. Um, and when you're doing that, you want to be as specific as you can. So for the example you gave here, instead of saying how can we cure cancer, that's kind of a vague question. It's not an easy question to study, you know. But you can say something like, how is cell number controlled or how is cell cycle controlled in the pathogenesis of pancreatic cancer, for example. So that could be the specific research question. And then you move forward to talk about how you approached the study design, the results. I think we've talked about this on the channel, and I think I linked um, some of my suggestions on how to respond to this kind of question in terms of explaining your research experience. So this is a fantastic resource on how to structure. You can see it's point by point. So I encourage you to check it out. Okay. Let me make sure we are doing fine here. Okay. so you can still hear me. Of course, I'm recording, I'm live on YouTube, and it will be recorded and uploaded. Because I didn't notify folks beforehand. I even appreciate that there is anybody here. But yeah, I hope this will still be useful for people going for interviews. All right, so the second thing, again, make sure you read all this. But the second thing I wanted to point out is the second suggestion by Dr. Montaya from UCLA. So sometimes we have questions that we want to ask, but some questions might not be appropriate for certain audiences. So I think the illustration they made here was to give good suggestions on the kind of questions you should ask, who to ask these questions, and what you should know before you actually accept any offer, either during the interview or after the interview. For example, I think I've said this on the channel before, if you are trying to get a sense of how students cope in a potentially expensive area, let's say you are coming to places in California or New York or Boston, which are some of the ridiculously expensive areas in the US, and you want to understand how you might be able to cope well with your stipend, for example. Um, so that is probably not an appropriate question for a faculty or a PI, because they are making more money and they will be able to cope better in that environment. So they might give you some responses that might not be fitting for such questions. So you want to ask current students, those kind of questions. Okay. So these are some of the suggestions that Dr. Montaya gave. And I know it might look blurry here, but I hope when you get to the website, you'll be able to maybe save the image and get a clearer resolution there. Okay. Now, the third professor is Dr. Garcia, and he's from Washington State University. And here you can see that one of the first sentences is, you will be asked to describe your research experiences. Okay. So it's important to know the big picture or the significance of your work or the implication of the study. People who are familiar with me always know that I hammer on that when I'm preparing someone for an interview. What's the implication of your research experience? Just pick one study. You don't have to talk about, the 3, 4, or 5 studies you've done. Pick one study and use that as a template to show them that you can actually discuss your science or whatever study that you have done in the past. Okay. Of course, there are a lot of important suggestions here, but I do want to point out what he said about underrepresented minorities. So he said here that these people like me, because I can be categorized as an URM as well. There are different terms for URMs. So he said here, let's continue, that URMs typically do poorly in interviews than their non-URM counterparts. And the reason is complicated, of course, like he alluded to here, but some of the reasons might be because of confidence. It seems in responses that certain URMs are not as confident as other folks, and some of these things, of course, can be improved by adequate preparation and knowing the kind of questions to ask, how to structure responses, which some of these things help with. And now one of the key suggestions I would give, especially if you are doing this via Zoom, if you are doing this virtually. So for virtual interviews, it's tricky because I would always prefer one-on-one interactions, but if you're doing this virtually, it's important that you look at the camera. While I'm doing this live, I'm looking at my screen. Um, you might be looking at your screen as well. And that is something that you should check to make sure that you are discussing, you are presenting your answer straight to that tiny camera hole, okay? Not the screen. That could, if you do that, it could really add some points to how you're perceived in terms of how confident you are. So, but again, it's tricky if you're doing these things via Zoom, but making that eye contact with the camera and practicing your responses, making sure they go out of your mouth as smoothly as they can, that's very important as well. So some of the ways you can do that is to, you can repeat some of these answers to yourself in front of a mirror. You can record your voice, and listen to yourself. And if you're a scientist like I am, you would be one of your biggest critics when it comes to um how to improve yourself when it comes to some of these things. So, or you could also present to another person who is more knowledgeable than you are. So that's some of the things you can do, but confidence, you know, exuding confidence, that's very important, especially if you are an underrepresented minority. So this professor actually knows what he's talking about because he is the department chair of, I think, the molecular biology department, if I'm correct, at WashU. So he must have seen a lot of these things in candidates that are not successful during the interview process. So make sure you improve your practice so that you can appear confident during your interviews. All right, the fourth um, resource that I want to share is actually a paper, a published paper you can find out there. But this paper is unique in the sense that it's a whole publication targeted towards uh, historically excluded individuals. And sometimes, they call them URMs, like we've discussed before. There are various terms, but you know, arguing about the correct term is not the aim of this session. But anyways, what they did here, according to their illustration here, they presented a lot of suggestions and advice, some very good advice on, what to do before appearing for your interview, how to do your research, and on the day of the interview, how to present yourself, and also what to do after the interview, which I think is important. Now, of course, I linked the paper in this post, but one thing that I found very helpful, I, of course, didn't know much of this before. I've never pointed this out to anyone before, but they actually made some good points about inappropriate questions. So they gave us some questions that any interviewer should not ask. So because there are certain things that are sort of illegal, so you can't discriminate based on religion, sex, gender, the nationality, there are various ones. Um, so for example, if you are asked what is your religion and will it impact your work, or how will it impact your work? So the discussion about religion, not something you expect, during your interview. So if you are asked some of these inappropriate questions, how would you respond to that? This, I think they gave us some suggestions of some of these inappropriate questions and how you can answer them professionally to the best of your ability. So it's a bit tricky, but if you go through their paper, you would understand some of these questions. And if you happen to get them, you have an idea how to respond. Okay. All right. So again, I put the full link of the paper here. And the last resource, it's actually pretty simple from Dr. Lai from uh, Boston College. So these are some basic questions you should expect at any interview whatsoever. If you are actually meeting with like a group of professors in an admission committee, of course, they will have more diverse interests and questions for you. But I promise you some of these things will come up. So you have to prepare for some of these questions. Um, if you're meeting with just one professor, some of these things would also appear during your discussion. And I think we have some of these things as part of the resource we have on the platform. So, things like tell us about yourself. You should, how to answer that. I think I have a video on that on this channel. Why did you apply here? What do you want, or who do you want to work with? I think that's a mistake there. What's something you want to study? So what do you hope to do after? And if you have any questions for us. Now, note that some of these things you've already talked about them. You must have talked about them in your personal statement or statement of purpose or in any other essays that you wrote for your application. So they probably have seen it, but you don't want to assume that they remember or recollect or know what you have told them you want to do, for example. So essentially what I'm saying is try not to deviate too much from whatever you've written down in your, for example, statement of purpose as regards responses to some of these things, because you must have talked about, for example, why you are applying to that school. So they have probably seen that your document, your application, and they liked your application and they thought, hey, let's talk more to this guy and see if this is an interesting person or personality to, work with, because you'll be working with them for the next 2 or 4 years or 5 years, however long it takes for a master's or PhD. So they want to see if this person can hold a conversation. So don't try to deviate too much from what you actually submitted. So if you got an interview, go back to your application documents. Make sure for each school that you are going to interview at, make sure you understand what you actually wrote to them in your application and don't deviate too much from that. So that is all I wanted to quickly share with you. And I hope you will find it helpful. And if you have any questions, of course, you can put it in the comments. I know this is an impromptu session because I just, it just dropped in my mind that I should share this because someone saw it actually on the blog and found it really helpful. So after interacting with that person, I thought, hey, I should also share this online so that someone who has already got an invite can benefit from this as well. So that's really what I wanted to share briefly. I'm hoping to send out emails to all subscribers of our website, bestmanacademy.com. So this Saturday, I'll be online for another 1 or 2 hours to answer any questions. And if you want to practice any interview questions, I'll be able to help. So yeah, that's all I have. If you have any questions, you can email or I'll put it in the chat. All right, that's it. It's 12:22 a.m. So I gotta go.